Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Amna Gul from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication. We're back with the course Introduction to Communication bearing the code GMC 101. It's our 18th lecture today and the topic is Logos. Logos is appeal to logic by relying on the audience's intelligence and offering evidence in support of your argument. Logos also develops ethos because the information makes you look knowledgeable. Ethos is important because logical arguments are not easily dismissed. So today we'll be discussing what Logos actually is, and I'll also move the discussion towards logical fallacies, what these are, and we need to avoid those. And I'll conclude with the discussion of kairos. So this will end up a discussion of rhetorical appeals. Let's start off with what Logos is. It is actually a Greek terminology for the term word. It focuses attention on the message. It is often called as logical appeal or appeal to reason. It points out internal consistency and clarity within its argument, and it frequently uses data to support its claim. I'll first start off with using an example, sharing with you a video as an example of Logos, and then I'll go more into the details of what Logos actually is, how we can polish it, how it is used, and all these things. So we'll first start off with this example of Logos.
Lungs are like sponges designed to soak up air. But some people use their lungs to soak up cigarette smoke. If you could wring out the cancer-producing tar that goes into the lungs of a pack-a-day smoker every year, this is how much you'd get. It's enough to make you sick. Very sick. Authorized by the New South Wales Government, Sydney.
This commercial is my example of Logos because it uses a combination of the narration, the colors, and the symbolism of the images, such as the sponges filling with tar to represent the cancer in your lungs from smoking, to show that this is clearly not a logical thing to do to your body if it is this unhealthy for you.
So we just saw the advertisement that we just saw. It basically focuses, the whole focus is on the message, and it uses logic or statistics and numbers to tell you about the argument, and the strength of the argument is basically based on data. So this is what Logos is. This was a very simple example. I'll be sharing further examples with you as we move on with our lecture today. So Logos is an appeal to logic or logical reason. It is all about the clarity, consistency, and soundness of an argument. From the premise and structure to the evidence and support, it is all about the soundness of your argument. A writer appeals to Logos by making reasonable claims and supporting those claims with evidence. The evidence can be statistics or other data and facts. However, logical and reasonable arguments and evidence are not universal across audiences, neither across contexts, cultures, or times. So when an audience considers reasonable claims, and whatever an audience considers as reasonable claims or considers as adequate evidence is influenced by an audience's values and beliefs. So it is not like this that one size fits all approach can be used while using Logos. You need to understand the kind of audience, the context, the culture, the times to be able to use those logics. Further, data and facts may evolve over time, and we obtain more evidence and information and data. So there are times that one thing stands true, one thing is considered as a reasonable claim at one time, and with the passage of time, things change. New information comes in, and the same data is no more considered as a reasonable claim. So you can use two different types of logic. You can use inductive logic by giving your readers or your audience a bunch of similar examples and then drawing from them to a journal proposition. This logic is pretty simple, given, for example, this, that, and the other thing, which is the proof. So there you go, there's a conclusion. While on the other side, you can use deductive reasoning by giving your audience a few journal propositions and then drawing from them a specific truth. Like, because such and such is true, and such is true, and that another such and such is true, and everybody agrees on the other thing. Thus, proof stands to reason, and there is a new truth. So these obviously are used dependent on the context and on the situations in which these need to be used. Now, talking about how to develop, well, to use logos would be to cite facts and statistics, or historical and literal analogies, and citing certain authorities on the subject. Logos can be developed by using advanced, theoretical, or abstract language. Remember, logos is now about advanced level of language. Citing facts, which is very, 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 very important. Using historical and literal analogies, as I just stated, and by constructing logical arguments. So when you are using logos, for example, in your academic writings, when you're attempting any assignment or any questions in your paper, so you need to think about that while using logos, how can you go about constructing your arguments in a logical manner. This is why when I tell you that in order to attempt questions, you need to make mind maps so that you know how to go about that particular thing. It's just not like that, like this idea comes in and then another comes in and you just write those down. No, you need to plan the structure of your writing. Same holds true for your presentations as well. So appeals to logos are an important part of your academic writing, but you will see them in commercials as we just saw them in a commercial now. So although commercials use more commonly use pathos and ethos, but advertisers will sometimes use logos to sell products. Even, for example, commercials based on saving consumers money, such as car commercials that focus on miles per liter, are appealing to consumers' sense of logos. You have come across so many advertisements yourself, where especially for bike advertisements, that, for example, they state "chalti jaye," I guess, because it actually tells you that if you refuel it, so it goes on a long way. So that kind of things. Now I'll share with you another example of logos before I move further into it, because ethos and pathos are very common, and logos we do not actually understand in our daily lives apart from academics. So I'm using more attractive examples of audiovisual stuff. Listen to this one very carefully. Just an example of how they build upon it. It's not that we agree with, because it's using a bit of political stuff in it. So it's not actually necessary that you agree with the content of it. We just need to understand how they are building up logos.
Going to change that, we have to start somewhere. So we're starting here with Joseph Kony, because now we know what to do. Here it is. Ready? In order for Kony to be arrested this year, the Ugandan military has to find him. In order to find him, they need the technology and training to track him in the vast jungle. That's where the American advisors come in. But in order for the American advisors to be there, the U.S. government has to deploy them. They've done that. But if the government doesn't believe the people care about arresting Coney, the mission will be canceled. In order for the people to care, they have to know. And they will only know if Coney's name is everywhere. This is the dream. Coney arrested for all the world to see. And the abducted children returned home.
Did you notice how logically the argument was developed? The construction involved like starting off how you can do it, and then where they needed people to stand up. So this was all about using logic to motivate people or to make them do what the persuader actually wanted them to do, for example, in terms of taking action and stuff. So this is part of it. Now we'll move towards improving logos. Well, we just saw it, and we are not now going to be to jot down certain points how we can actually make things happen. So for the first thing, you need to be comprehensive. Make sure your points and arguments can be understood. Use that kind of a language which is understood by your audience. Avoid jargon and technical terminology. So we did discuss advanced language earlier, but that did not mean that you need to use words that your audience does not understand. You may use figures and charts. You can make the relationship between your evidence and conclusions clear, which we just saw, that the evidence just led into the conclusion. So it was very clear. And you can obviously use analogies and metaphors dependent on whatever the situation is. Secondly, you need to be logical. Ensure that your arguments make sense and that your claims and evidence are not questionable. You just saw like there was no point in questioning this, that they need to arrest him, and people need to put their inputs just for the government to be sure they want this thing to happen. So you need to have a plan for dealing with opposing viewpoints that your listeners may already believe in or your readers may believe in. So there are times when you are, this was actually a pre-packaged thing, but when there is a live audience going on, so people have to be, whoever wants to use logos, they have to be prepared for opposing viewpoints as well, that how they can deal it. Then you need to ensure that the audience is involved. In case of live audience, you can engage them by asking questions. Same is the case with even in academic writing. You can talk about opposing views, as this allows you to explain why your logical arguments are far more reasonable. So this is actually how you convince the other person that the argument is logically correct. You can build your argument on the audience's widely held beliefs, which are like commonplaces. For example, use the audience's commonplace like a fact and apply it to a new situation. So if you want to encourage your class fellows, for example, to join a committee, use their commonplace. For example, rather than your belief, you will say, this committee needs considerate and kind-hearted people. So you actually, everyone wants to be known or even wants to satisfy themselves that they are kind-hearted and they are considerate people. So you actually use their belief and their commonplace, and you tell them that whoever actually joins this committee, those will be considerate and kind-hearted people. Finally, you need to be specific. Base your claims on facts and examples, as your arguments will be accepted quicker than something non-specific and non-concrete. The more easily the evidence is accepted, the more easily the conclusions will be accepted. So you need to be very specific with your facts, examples, your arguments. Facts and statistics cannot be debated, and they signify the truth. Visual evidence such as objects and videos are once again hard to challenge. Citing specialists and authorities on a topic, they also increase the quality of your evidence and therefore your claims. Tell stories such as case studies or your personal experiences. The audience would like to hear your own stories, but if you're a specialist on that topic, so you need to be clear that why you use a particular story. Then the strategies for building logos, like as you work to build logos in your arguments, keep these strategies in mind. I'll just share a few, the important ones. Both experience and source material can provide you with evidence to appeal to logos, while outside sources will provide you with excellent evidence in any argumentative essay. In some situations, you can share personal experiences and observations. Once again, these are some situations depending on whatever you are dealing with. Just make sure that those experiences and observations are appropriate to the situation and you present them in a clear and logical manner. Remember to think about your audience as your appeal to logos. Just because something makes sense in your mind, it doesn't mean it will make the same kind of sense to your audience. So I was saying that you need to keep your audience in your mind because, as I said, just because something makes sense in your mind, it doesn't mean it will make the same kind of sense to your audience. You need to try to see things from your audience's perspective. This is something very, very important, and this is something people usually miss out. So, for example, what you can try is have others read your writing, especially those who might disagree with your position. This is very, very helpful. You don't write currently in this situation, you people do not write this kind of things, but as we will move on, actually you need to work it out. The more polished your communication skills are, the more helpful are these, especially when you seek to build your future in media industry, which is all about persuasion. So you need to know these things. Then you need to be sure to maintain clear lines of reasoning throughout your argument. One single error in logic can negatively impact your entire position. When you present, for example, faulty logic, you lose credibility. And if you're not credible, then obviously you're not persuasive. So you need to plan it out very well. Then finally, when presenting an argument based on logos, it is important to avoid emotional overtones and maintain an even tone of voice. Remember, this is about obviously speaking. Remember, it's not just a matter of the type of evidence you're presenting, but how you present this evidence is also very, very important. So if you keep these few points in mind for your academic writings as well as your presentations, and then in the longer run, you'll have polished your skills to use appeal to logos. Now we'll move towards, as I said earlier, we'll move towards logical fallacies. Logos is about appealing to your audience's logical side. We have cleared that. You have to think about what makes sense to your audience and use that as you build your argument. This is also clear for us. Now, for example, if you're writing something, as writers, we appeal to logos by presenting a line of reasoning in our arguments that is logical and clear. And we use evidence such as statistics and factual information when we appeal to logos. Then, where do the fallacies come in? Well, fallacies are common errors in reasoning that will undermine the logic of your argument. Fallacies can be either legitimate arguments or irrelevant points. and are often identified because they lack evidence that supports their claim. So you need to avoid these common fallacies in your arguments, and you also need to watch for them in the arguments of others. You'll get to know how people tend to persuade others, or they tend to persuade you, since you are now into communication studies. So you need to understand these things very well. Now, the first one, slippery slope. This is a conclusion based on the premise that if A occurs, then eventually through a series of small steps, through B, C, X, Y, Z will happen. So basically equating A and Z, that A leads to Z. So if we don't want Z to occur, A must not be allowed to occur either. Now this is a logical fallacy. This does not stand true to logic. Then hasty generalization. This is a conclusion based on insufficient or biased evidence. In other words, you are rushing to a conclusion before you have all the relevant facts. For example, let's suppose, someone says, even though it's only the first day, but I can tell this is going to be a boring course. See, in this example, whoever is saying this thing is basing his evaluation of the entire course on only the first day, which is notoriously boring and limits to introductions for most courses. To make a fair and reasonable evaluation, the author must attend not one but several classes, and possibly even examine for, let's suppose, the course contents, or talk to the teacher, or talk to others who have taken this course previously and finished it, in order to have sufficient evidence to base a conclusion on it. Then, genetic fallacy. This conclusion is based on an argument that the origins of a person, idea, institute, or theory determine the character, nature, or worth of this, whatever the person is, or idea, or theory, institute, whatever. For example, the Volkswagen Beetle is an evil car because it was originally designed by Hitler's army. See, in this example, the author is equating the character of a car with the character of the people who built the car. However, the two are not inherently related. So this is a genetic fallacy. Begging the claim, the conclusion that the writer should prove is validated within the claim. For example, filthy and polluting coal should be banned. Now, arguing that coal pollutes the earth and thus should be banned would be logical. But the very conclusion that should be proved, which is that coal causes enough pollution to warrant banning its use, it is already assumed in the claim by referring to it as filthy and polluting. This is very, very much common. This happens a lot. Then circular argument. This restates the argument rather than actually proving it. For example, George Bush is a good communicator because he speaks effectively. In this example, the conclusion that Bush is a good communicator and the evidence used to prove it, he speaks effectively, are basically the same idea. Specific evidence such as using everyday language, breaking down complex problems, or illustrating his points with humorous stories would be needed to prove either half of the sentence. Either or, this is a conclusion that oversimplifies the argument by reducing it to only two sides or choices. For example, we can either stop using cars or destroy the earth. Now, in this example, the two choices are presented as the only options, yet the author ignores a range of choices in between, such as developing cleaner technology, car sharing systems for necessities and emergencies, or better community planning to discourage daily driving. Red herring. This is a diversionary tactic that avoids the key issues, often by avoiding opposing arguments rather than addressing them. For example, the level of mercury in seafood may be unsafe, But what will fishers do to support their families then? Now, in this example, the author switches the discussion away from the safety of the food that was about mercury levels and talks instead about an economic issue, which is the livelihood of those catching fish. So, while one issue may affect the other, it does not mean we should ignore possible safety issues because of possible economic consequences to a few individuals. So, this is once again an example of logical fallacy. Strawman. This move oversimplifies an opponent's viewpoints and then attacks that hollow argument. People who don't support the country's minimum wage increase hate the poor, for example. Now, in this example, the author attributes the worst possible motive to an opponent's position. In reality, however, the opposition probably has more complex and sympathetic arguments to support their point. So, by not addressing those arguments, the author is not treating the opposition with respect or rather refuting their position. Then, moral equivalence. The fallacy compares minor misdeeds with major atrocities, suggested that both are equally immoral. For example, that traffic police who gave me a ticket is as bad as Hitler. Now, in this example, the author is comparing the relatively harmless actions of a person doing their job with the horrific actions of Hitler. This comparison is unfair and inaccurate. So, in order to develop strong appeals to logos, we have to avoid faulty logic. And faulty logic can be anything from assuming one event caused another to making blanket statements based on little evidence, as I just explained some of the examples. And these are very, very much common. We get used to listening to these, and then we get used to using these in both our oral communications as well as in our academic writings. Now, there is uncertainty over which pillar of the rhetorical appeals is the most important. Aristotle thought that logos was vital, but when used by itself, it lacks impact. So you need to ensure that you treat all three pillars with equal importance to succeed in persuading your audience. I'll share with you an example of using all three appeals. Listen very carefully.
What do I tell my daughter? Do I tell her that her grandpa's worth more than her grandma? That her dad is worth more than her mom? Do I tell her that despite her education, her drive, her skills, her intelligence, she will automatically be valued as less than every man she ever meets? Or maybe I'll be able to tell her something different.
Now listen carefully to the analysis of this advertisement.
Audi's new commercials have a gender equality message with their new hashtag Drive Progress and is said to bring more progressive messages. This one, called Daughter, was released at the 2017 Super Bowl.
What do I tell my daughter?
A rhetorical question to emphasize the current gender inequity, and a popular question from those disappointed by the 2016 election. His daughter is shown competing with all boys, showing that she lives in a man's world, and that's not always fair.
Do I tell her that her grandpa's worth more than her grandma?
The importance of a male narrator is that he relates to the targeted audience, fathers with daughters, and if a woman were to narrate, the message would be stigmatized.
That her dad is worth more than her mom?
father asked to provoke thought and understanding about gender inequity.
Do I tell her that despite her education, her drive, her skills, her intelligence, she will automatically be valued as less than every man she ever meets?
The boy's giving her a hard time with the use of the father's rhetorical question is using pathos to provoke sympathy for his daughter, who would be valued less than men. The car industry is male-dominated, especially car racing. By showing her winning, Audi is attempting to break down gender stereotypes around car industries.
Or maybe I'll be able to tell her something different.
This is a subtle call for change for a progressive future. Audi is proving their credibility in using ethos by committing to equal pay for equal work and is relating to Hillary Clinton's women's rights campaign. This commercial was aired during the Super Bowl halftime to target a wide variety of viewers, including fathers with daughters and people who support gender equality. Audi used ethos by hiring Aoife McArdle, a female director. Directing is another male-dominated profession. Hiring a woman exercises Audi's commitment to equal pay for equal work.
So you see how Audi used the three appeals. They used all of these to persuade the audience. But apart from that, as mentioned, this was after 2016 elections. This was made where Hillary Clinton actually had to face things, and then she had these campaigns for women's rights. So here we come to our next point, which is kairos. Kairos is the Greek word for time. Often for an ad or an argument to be successful, it needs appropriate tone and structure and come at the right time. In rhetoric, kairos refers to the opportune moment and appropriateness for persuading a particular audience about a particular subject. Kairos depends on a strong awareness of rhetorical situation. Kairos is the where, why, and when of persuasion. For example, nearly all op-eds and political essays are kairotic. The writers work to relate their ideas and messages to whatever is happening in the news and popular culture. As, for example, we just saw in this example, in the video we just played, it was very much timely. The advertisement was related to the campaigns, the problems, and the political situation. So this is how it has done. Now you need to remember that effective arguments use each of these rhetorical strategies to some extent. Some news articles may focus on connecting with the reader's empathy rather than presenting a lot of statistics. But logos is still likely to be involved to some degree. Some ads may really focus on what's hot now, which seems like a direct appeal to kairos, but also involves ethos by using a popular celebrity who serves as a credible source on new trends. So in order to persuade your audience, proper use of ethos, pathos, and logos is necessary with an understanding of kairos. That's all for today. Thank you.